Hello and welcome to our channel. Today, we're diving into one of Sherlock Holmes' most mind-boggling cases, the man with the twisted lip. Set in the dark and foggy streets of Victorian London, this mysterious story sees Holmes uncovering shocking truths as he delves deep into the mystery. Stay with us to witness the pinnacle of detective art. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, now is the perfect time. By subscribing, you can get instant updates on our new videos and witness many more thrilling adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Enjoy watching. The principal of St. George's Theological College and Dr. Elias Whitney had a brother named Isa Whitney who was severely addicted to opium. While at college, he read De Quincey's book and started this habit by adding opium tincture to his tobacco to experience the same things. Like many others, he found quitting harder than starting. But alas, for many years, he was a slave to the drug, a source of shame and sorrow for his friends and family. The image of this noble man's wreck, with his yellow, pale face, drooping lips, and shrunken pupils, slumped in a chair, still lingers in my mind. One night, in June of '89, at the time when people begin to yawn and look at the clock, there was a knock at my door. I straightened up in my seat. My wife, putting down her knitting with a look of disappointment, said, "It must be a patient. You'll have to go out," I muttered to myself, as I had already had a tiring day. We heard the front door open, a hurried conversation downstairs, and quick footsteps on the floorboards. The door to our room opened, and a lady in dark clothes and a black veil entered. "I'm sorry for coming at such a late hour," she began, but lost control and rushed forward, throwing her arms around my wife's neck and resting her head on her shoulder, crying, "Oh, I am in such trouble," she exclaimed. "I need help." "Good heavens," said my wife, lifting the woman's veil. "It's Kate Whitney. You frightened me, Kate. I didn't realize who you were when you came in. I didn't know what else to do, so I came straight to you. It was always like this. Anyone in trouble would come directly to my wife. I'm so glad you came. Now have some wine and water, then sit down comfortably and tell us everything. Should I send James to bed?" "Oh no. I need the doctor's advice and help. It's about Isa. He hasn't come home for 2 days. I'm so worried about him." This was not the first time she had come to me as a doctor and to my wife as an old school friend with her husband's troubles. We did our best to soothe and comfort her. Did she know where he was? Could we bring him back? It seemed possible. Recently, she had received definite information that he had been frequenting an opium den in the east of the city. His crises usually did not last more than a day, and by evening, he would return home in a wretched state. But now it had been 48 hours. She was sure he was lying in the filth of the docks, consuming that poison. She was confident we could find him at the Golden Bar in Upper Swandam Lane. What could she do? As a young and embarrassed woman, how could she enter such a place and rescue her husband from those ruffians? What would people say? The matter was clear, and there was only one solution. Could I accompany her there? Or better yet, did the lady even need to come? After all, I was Isa Whitney's medical advisor, and I should have enough influence over him. It would be better if I went alone. I promised her that if her husband was at the address she provided, I would have him sent home in a carriage within 2 hours. And so, within 10 minutes, I found myself out of my comfortable chair and warm home, heading east on a strange mission. I couldn't have known what other oddities awaited me. However, the first stage of my adventure presented no difficulty. Upper Swandam Lane was one of those vile alleyways behind the wharves, connecting the north side of the river to the east of London Bridge. The place I was looking for was a cellar-like dark basement reached by steps between 2 buildings. Telling the cabman to wait, I descended the rotting stairs, worn down by years of drunken feet, and found the latch to open the door by the light of an oil lamp placed above it. I found myself in a long, low room, arranged with bunks like the berths of an emigrant ship, the air heavy with opium smoke. People lay in strange postures, barely discernible in the gloom. Shoulders were hunched, knees bent, heads thrown back. They lay still, Here and there, a few pairs of gleaming eyes turned to look at the newcomer. Amid the dark shadows, small red circles of light appeared and disappeared with the glow and fade of the metal pipe's poison. Some muttered to themselves. Others conversed in odd, low, monotonous voices in small groups. During the conversations, some raised their voices in excitement and then sank back into silence. But ultimately, everyone was muttering their own thoughts without listening to those beside them. At the far end of the room, near a brazier, sat a tall, thin, old man on a three-legged wooden stool, elbows on knees, chin in hand, staring into the fire. As I entered, a pale Malayan attendant approached with a pipe and some opium, gesturing towards a bunk. "Thank you, but I won't be staying long," I said. "I've come to speak with my friend Mr. Isa Whitney." There was a stir to my right, and out of the darkness emerged Whitney, pale, gaunt, and in a wretched state. "My God, it's Watson," he said. He was pitiful. His entire body was trembling. "Tell me, Watson, what time is it?" "Nearly 11. What day is it?" "Friday, June 19th. "Good heavens, I thought it was Wednesday." "Isn't it Wednesday? You're trying to frighten me, aren't you?" His face buried in his arms. He began to sob uncontrollably. "I told you it's Friday. Your wife has been waiting for you for 2 days. You should be ashamed of yourself." "I am ashamed already. But you're mistaken, Watson, for I've only been here a few hours. I lost count of how many, but I've smoked no more than 3 or 4 pipes. But I will come home with you. I don't want to frighten my poor little Kate. Help me." "Did you come by carriage?" "Yes, there's one waiting outside. Then I'll come. But how much do I owe?" "Find out how much I owe, Watson. I am in no state to manage it myself." Holding my breath to avoid inhaling the foul, stupefying smoke of the drug, I made my way through the sleeping forms and began to look for the proprietor. As I passed the tall man by the brazier, I felt someone tug at my coat. A low voice said, "Walk past me and then look back at me." I heard the words clearly. The voice could only have come from the old man sitting near me, but he sat there in the same reverie as before. He was very thin and aged. The opium pipe between his knees seemed to have fallen from his hand only moments earlier. Taking 2 steps forward, I turned and looked back. I barely managed to suppress a cry of surprise. The man had turned, so only I could see his face. His back was straight, his wrinkles gone, his eyes regained their old sparkle. Sitting there by the fire, grinning at my bewilderment, was none other than Sherlock Holmes. He motioned for me to come closer, and then returned to his elderly demeanour. "Holmes," I whispered, "what are you doing here?" "Speak as softly as you can," he answered. "I have excellent hearing. If you can get rid of your drunken friend, I would like to speak with you. There's a carriage waiting outside. Then send your friend home. You can trust him to make it, for he is in no condition to cause trouble. Also, it would be wise to send a note to your wife, telling her that you are with me. If you wait outside, I will join you in 5 minutes." It was always hard to refuse Sherlock Holmes because he always expressed his thoughts with calm authority. Once I had settled Whitney in the carriage, there was nothing more to be done. I was ready to join my friend in one of his strange adventures. Within a few minutes, I had written the note, paid Whitney's debt, and placed him in the carriage. Shortly after, an elderly, decrepit figure emerged from inside, and we began walking down the street together. For a while, he walked hunched and limping. Then he looked around, straightened up, and burst into genuine laughter. "Watson," he said, "you must be wondering if I have added opium smoking to my list of vices, along with cocaine. I was indeed surprised to see you there. And what about my finding you there? I was looking for a friend, and I was looking for an enemy." "An enemy?" "Yes, one of my oldest foes, or rather, one of my natural prey. In short, Watson, I am involved in a very peculiar investigation, and as usual, I came here to gather some information from these drunkards. If they had recognized me, my life would have been in great danger. I have used this place before. The scoundrel who runs it, Lascar, knows me and has sworn revenge. If the secret door behind the building leading to Paul's Wharf could speak, it would tell some strange tales of the dark nights. What? Do you mean murder? Yes, murder. If we received £1,000 for every poor soul who was murdered there, we would be rich. It is the deadliest trap on the riverside, and I fear Neville St. Clair walked in there never to return. But hold on, our trap should be set around here somewhere. He put his fingers between his teeth and let out a shrill whistle. There was a distant reply, and soon the sound of wheels and horses approached. "Well, Watson," said Holmes as a carriage with yellow lamps piercing the darkness came into view. "You're coming with me, aren't you? If I can be of help. A trusted friend is always useful, a chronicler even more so. There is a spare bed in my room at the Cedars." "The Cedars?" "Yes, that's Mr. St. Clair's home. I will be staying there while I conduct my investigation." "Where exactly is this place?" "In Kent, near Lee. We have a 7-mile journey ahead. But I don't know anything yet." "Of course you don't. You'll find out soon enough. Get in the carriage. John, we don't need you anymore. Here's half a sovereign for you. Come back around 11 tomorrow. See you then." He lightly whipped the horses, and together we plunged into the dark and deserted streets. The road widened and led to a broad bridge over the sluggish, murky river. The monotony of the brick stacks ahead was occasionally broken by the heavy, regular footsteps of a policeman or the songs of a few drunken passers-by. A cluster of clouds drifted slowly in the sky, with a few stars peeking through now and then. Holmes drove in silence, his head bowed in deep thought, while I sat beside him, curious about the details of this new investigation that was clearly straining his powers, yet hesitant to disturb his thoughts. After several more miles, as we reached the outskirts of the city's suburbs, Holmes gave a little shake, straightened his shoulders, and lit his pipe. "You're excellent at keeping quiet, Watson," he said. "It shows what a valuable friend you are. Actually, having someone to talk to is very important for me, because my current thoughts are far from cheerful. I'm thinking about what to tell the young lady we met at the door tonight. Remember that I still don't know anything about this matter," I replied. "I can tell you everything before we reach Lee. Despite its apparent simplicity, I haven't made any progress. There are many threads, but I haven't found their ends. Now let me lay out the case clearly and briefly. Perhaps you will see a spark that I have missed." "Go ahead," I encouraged. "A few years ago, specifically in May 1884, a gentleman named Neville St. Clair, who appeared to be quite wealthy, moved to Lee. He bought a large villa, furnished it splendidly, and began living a life of leisure. Over time, he made friends in the area, and in 1887, he married the daughter of a local brewer, with whom he had 2 children. He had no particular job, but had connections with several companies, so he regularly went to the city in the mornings and returned on the 5:14 train from Cannon Street in the evenings. Mr. St. Clair is now 37 years old. A moderate personality, a good husband, a loving father, and well liked by everyone who knows him. From what we've learned, he had a credit of £220 at the Capital and Counties Bank and a debt of £88. So I don't think he was someone who worried about money. Last Monday, Mr. Neville St. Clair went to the city earlier than usual and, while leaving, mentioned that he had 2 important errands and that he would bring a box of toy bricks for his little boy when he returned. On that same day, shortly after he left, his wife received a telegram from the Aberdeen Shipping Company informing her that a package she was expecting had arrived. If you know London well, you will be aware that the office of this company is in Fresno Street, north of Upper Swandham Lane, where we were tonight. Mrs. St. Clair had lunch, went to the city, did some shopping, collected her package from the company's office, and around 4:35 was passing through Swandham Lane on her way to the station. Is everything clear so far? Everything is very clear, I replied. If you remember, Monday was extremely hot. Mrs. St. Clair, walking slowly and looking for a cab, felt uneasy in the area. As she walked down Swandham Lane, she suddenly heard a cry and, to her astonishment, saw her husband beckoning to her from a second-story window of a building. She clearly saw his distressed face from the open window. As he waved frantically, he suddenly disappeared, as if pulled back by someone. With her keen eyes, she noticed something peculiar. Although he was wearing a dark coat similar to the one he left home in that morning, he was without a collar and tie. Thinking something was terribly wrong, she ran down the stairs outside the building. It was the opium den we visited tonight, and passed through the front room, heading for the stairs to the upper floor. But the vile Lascar I mentioned earlier, along with a Danish accomplice, stopped her at the foot of the stairs and pushed her back onto the street. Filled with anxiety and fear, she ran down the lane and fortunately encountered a few policemen on the way. With an inspector and 2 officers, she returned to the building, despite the owner's protests, and went up to the room where Mr. St. Clair had last been seen. But he was not there. In fact, the only person on that floor was a crippled beggar who had made it his home. Both he and the Lascar swore that there was no one else in the room. The inspector was about to dismiss Mrs. St. Clair's claim when she suddenly cried out, rushed to a small box on the table, tore it open, and found inside the toy bricks her husband had promised to bring home. With this and the beggar's dubious demeanour, the inspector realised the gravity of the situation. The rooms were carefully examined, and all evidence pointed to a gruesome murder. The room that looked out onto the street was connected to a small bedroom that overlooked one of the docks. Between the dock and the bedroom window was a narrow strip of land that filled with water during high tide. The bedroom window was quite wide and opened from the bottom. An investigation revealed bloodstains on the windowsill and on the wooden floor of the room. All of Mr. Neville St. Clair's clothes were found stuffed behind a curtain in the sitting room. Everything except his coat, boots, socks, hat, and watch were there. No sign of violence was found on the clothes, but there was no trace of Mr. Neville St. Clair. With no other means of escape, it was presumed that he had exited through the window and swum away. Now, as for those wretches, they were naturally implicated. Although Lascar's criminal record was unknown, he could only have been complicit in the crime since he was seen at the foot of the stairs moments after Mrs. St. Clair saw her husband at the window. His defence was extremely ignorant, claiming he did not know what his lodger Hugh Boone was up to, and that it was the first time he had seen the gentleman's clothes. That's all for Lascar. Now let's move on to the cripple who stayed on the second floor of the opium den and was likely the last person to see Neville St. Clair alive. His name is Hugh Boone. Anyone who frequently roams the city knows his ugly face. He's actually a professional beggar, though he appears as a match seller to evade the police. On the left side of Threadneedle Street, not far from here, there's a small niche in the wall. That's his spot. Every day he sits there, cross-legged with his matches in his lap, and his wretched appearance elicits sympathy from passers-by, who drop their arms into the leather cap before him. I've followed him a few times out of curiosity, and you'd be amazed at the earnings he collects in a short time. His appearance is so distinct that no one can pass by without noticing him. With his orange hair, pale face, a disgusting scar running down to his upper lip, a bulldog chin, and piercing dark eyes that contrast starkly with his hair, he stands out among beggars. Now, we know he's the tenant of that filthy house, and the last person to see our missing man. But he's a cripple, I exclaimed. What could he do to a young man with just one arm? He only has a limp in one leg. Otherwise, he's a strong and healthy man. With your medical experience, you know well, Watson, that a weakness in one organ often leads to greater strength in others. Please, continue the story. Mrs. St. Clair fainted at the sight of the blood on the windowsill, and the police, thinking she would be of no further use, took her home during their investigation. Inspector Barton carefully examined the house, but found nothing to shed light on the matter. The only mistake made was not arresting Boone on the spot, as he could have spoken to Lascar in those 5 to 10 minutes. However, they soon rectified this error, apprehended him, and searched him but found no incriminating evidence. They did find a bloodstain on his right shirt sleeve, but he explained it away by showing a cut on his right finger. He also claimed that when he briefly went to the window, he did not see any bloodstains and believed that all the stains had come from the same source. He swore he had never seen Mr. Neville St. Clair before, and that the clothes in his room surprised him as much as they did the police. When reminded that Mrs. St. Clair had seen her husband at the window, he suggested she was either mad or hallucinating. Despite his vehement resistance, he was taken to the station. The inspector stayed behind, hoping to find fresh clues as the tide receded. But when the tide went out, all they found among the mud was not Mr. Neville St. Clair himself, but his coat. And what do you think they found in its pockets? I can't imagine. You wouldn't guess. The coat pockets were filled with coins, 421 pennies and 270 halfpennies. That's why the coat didn't drift away with the tide. But when it comes to the body, things are different. While the heavy coat sank, the body inside it was likely carried away by the river. But from what I understand, the other clothes were in the room. Could he have been wearing just a coat? No, sir. But one must approach everything with suspicion. Suppose this Boone pushed Neville St. Clair out the window. If no one saw him, what was left? Of course, to dispose of the other clothes. He might have thought to throw the coat out, but realised it wouldn't sink and would float. He didn't have much time because he could hear the commotion the woman was making below, followed by the arrival of the police. There wasn't a second to lose. He ran to the place where he hid his earnings from begging, filled the coat pockets with these coins, and then threw it out the window. If he hadn't heard the noise below, he would have done the same with the other clothes, but he only had time to close the window. That could be. We'll proceed with this hypothesis until a better one emerges. As I mentioned, they arrested Boone and took him to the station, but they couldn't find anything against him. Though known for begging for years, he hadn't committed any crimes. Here, we face some questions that need answers. What was Neville St. Clair doing in that opium den? What happened to him there? Where is he now? Is Hugh Boone involved? So far, I must admit, I've never encountered a case that seemed so simple at first glance, yet turned out to be so difficult. As Sherlock Holmes recounted this chain of events, our carriage had already left the outskirts of the city and entered the countryside. By the time he finished the story, we were passing between two villages, some windows still lit. We're on the outskirts of Lee, my companion said. During this short journey, we travelled from Middlesex, through Surrey, and finally reached Kent. Do you see those lights among the trees? That's the cedars, and the woman sitting by the lamp must have heard the horse's footsteps. But why don't you conduct your investigation from Baker Street? Because there are many investigations awaiting there. Mrs. St. Clair offered me 2 rooms, and I'm sure she'll be pleased to see a friend and colleague like you. I hate facing her without new information about her husband, Watson. Here we are. We stopped in front of a large villa. A servant came to take the carriage. I followed Holmes along the gravel path to the house. As we approached, the door opened and a blonde, short woman in a muslin dress with pink chiffon at the neck and wrists appeared. One hand on the door, the other slightly raised. She leaned forward, looking at us with curious eyes. "Well?" she exclaimed. "What news?" At first she seemed relieved to see we were 2, but then she sighed hopelessly as my friend shook his head and shrugged his shoulders. "Is there no good news?" "No." "Is there bad news?" "No." "That's something at least. But please don't stand at the door. You must be tired. It has been a long day for you." This is my friend, Dr. Watson. He has been a great help in several cases. By chance we met, and I included him in this investigation. "I'm pleased to meet you," she said, shaking my hand warmly. "Forgive us if anything is lacking. Everything happened so suddenly." "My dear lady," I said, "as a former soldier, I don't mind such inconveniences. I will be very happy if I can be of any assistance to you or my friend here. Now, Mr. Sherlock Holmes," she said as we entered the dining room, the table set for dinner, "I want to ask you a few questions. But please, answer me honestly." "Of course, madam." "Don't worry about my feelings. I won't have a hysterical fit or faint. I want to hear your true opinion." "About what?" "First of all, do you believe Neville is alive?" Sherlock Holmes seemed somewhat annoyed by this question. "Please answer me honestly right now," she repeated, looking at him intently. In that case, to be honest, I do not. You think he is dead? Yes. Was he murdered? I didn't say that, but maybe. What day did he die? Monday. So, Mr. Holmes, how do you explain that I received a letter from him today? Sherlock Holmes jumped out of his chair as if electrified. What? He roared. Yes, today. The woman smiled as she waved a piece of paper she was holding. May I see it? Certainly. He snatched the letter from her hand in his excitement and opened it on the table, examining it carefully with the aid of the lamp. I had risen from my seat and was looking over his shoulder. It was a thick envelope. It bore a Gravesend postmark with today's date, a crude handwriting. Holmes murmured, Surely this is not your husband's writing, madame. No, but the letter inside is. It seems the person who posted it had to look up the address. What do you mean? You see, the name is written very dark, which means it was allowed to dry naturally. The rest is lighter, indicating it was blotted. If it had all been blotted, it would have the same dark colour as the name. The man wrote the name and then paused before writing the address. This means he didn't know the address offhand. A small detail, but small details are always the most important. Now, let's see the letter. Ah, there are other things inside as well. Yes, a ring, a signet ring. Are you sure this writing is his? One of his handwriting styles. One of them? Yes, the one he uses when writing in haste. It doesn't resemble his usual handwriting, but I'm well acquainted with it. My dearest, don't be afraid. Everything will turn out well. There's a big mistake that will take some time to rectify. Be patient, Neville. Written in pencil on a blank page from a book, no watermark, sent from Gravesend by a man with dirty hands. Ah, and the flap has been sealed, if I'm not mistaken, by someone who chews tobacco. And you are certain this is your husband's handwriting, aren't you, madam? If that's the case, a lot could have happened in the meantime. Don't discourage me, Mr. Holmes. I know everything is fine. We have such a close bond that I would feel if something bad had happened to him. Recently, he cut his hand in the bedroom, and I felt something was wrong and rushed upstairs from the dining room. If I can sense something so trivial, wouldn't I know if he had died? I have often witnessed a woman's intuition being more accurate than the conclusions of a logical mind, and this letter naturally strengthens your feelings. But if your husband is alive, why hasn't he returned? I don't know. It's bewildering. And why did he disappear without notifying you on Monday? I don't know. Were you very surprised to see him in Swandam Lane? Very. Was the window open? Yes. Then he might have called out to you. Possibly. But as I understand, you only heard a faint cry. Yes. Did you think it was a call for help? Yes. He waved his hand. But he might have cried out in surprise, seeing you unexpectedly and waving in reaction. That's possible. Did you think he was pulled back? He disappeared suddenly. He might have jumped back. Did you see anyone else in the room? No, but that dreadful man confessed to being there, and the Lascar was at the foot of the stairs. Quite right. Was your husband dressed as usual? Yes, but he didn't have his collar or tie. I saw his bare throat clearly. Had he ever mentioned Swandam Lane to you before? No. Did he show any signs of opium use? Never. Thank you, Mrs. St. Clair. These were the crucial points I wanted to be sure of. Now we'll have dinner and retire to our rooms, as tomorrow will be a challenging day. The room was spacious and comfortable, with 2 beds. I went straight to bed, exhausted from the night's adventure. But Sherlock Holmes, when confronted with a problem, could go days or even weeks without rest, continuously turning the data over in his mind, rearranging it, and examining it from every angle until he found a solution or concluded that the evidence was insufficient. I knew he would stay up all night. He took off his coat and jacket, donned a loose blue dressing gown, and began gathering the pillows from the beds and the cushions from the sofa and armchairs. With these, he made a sort of oriental divan and sat cross-legged upon it. In the dim light of the lamp, I could see him sitting silently and motionlessly, gazing at the ceiling and puffing out blue smoke from his pipe. When I fell asleep, he was still sitting there, and when I woke with a start to find the sun already up, he was in the same position. His pipe was still in his mouth, and the smoke was still curling upwards. The room was thick with the smell of tobacco, and the pile of tobacco I had seen the night before had vanished. "Are you awake, Watson?" he asked. "Yes. Ready for a morning jaunt?" "Absolutely." "Then get dressed. No one else is up yet, but I know where the butler sleeps, and we can have the carriage prepared." He chuckled to himself as he spoke. His eyes were bright, and there was no trace of the sombre thinker from the night before. As I dressed, I glanced at my watch. It was reasonable that no one else was up. It was 25 minutes past 4. By the time Holmes came to inform me that the carriage was ready, I was dressed. "I want to test a small theory," he said, pulling on his boots. "Watson, I believe you are looking at one of the biggest fools in Europe right now. I should be thrown out of Charing Cross. But I think I've finally found the key to the matter." "And where is it?" I asked with a smile. "In the bathroom," he replied. "Yes, I'm not joking," he continued, seeing my skeptical expression. "I was just there, took it out, and put it in this suitcase. Come on, my friend, let's see if it fits the lock." We descended as quietly as possible and stepped out into the bright morning sun. The half-dressed butler stood by our carriage. Both of us jumped into the carriage and took the London road. Other than a few vegetable carts heading to the city, the villas on either side of the road stood silent and lifeless. "In some ways, this has been an interesting case," said Holmes, whipping the horses. "I must confess, I've been as blind as a mole, but better late than never." As we passed through Surrey, early risers were just beginning to peer out of their windows with sleepy faces. We crossed the river via Waterloo Bridge Road, went to Wellington Street, and then to the station on Bow Street. Sherlock Holmes was well known among the police, and the two officers at the door saluted him. One held the horses, while the other escorted us inside. "Who's on duty today?" Holmes asked. "Inspector Bradstreet, sir." "Ah, Bradstreet, how are you?" A tall, burly officer with a peaked cap and buttoned jacket appeared. "I have something I want to discuss with you in private." "Of course, Mr. Holmes. Come to my office." It was a proper office, with large shelves on the desk and a telephone on the wall. The inspector sat down at his desk. "What can I do for you, Mr. Holmes?" "I'm here about the beggar Boone, who is accused in the disappearance of Mr. Neville St. Clair of Lee." "Yes, he was brought in and detained for further inquiries." "I heard. Is he still here?" "In the cell." "Does he give you any trouble?" "Oh no, but he's a filthy fellow." "Filthy?" "Yes. No matter how much we try to get him to wash his hands, he refuses. Once his case is over, they'll give him a good scrub in prison. You'd agree if you saw him. I very much want to see him." "Really? We can arrange that. Come this way. You can leave your suitcase here." "No, I think I'd better keep it with me." "As you wish. This way, please." He led us down a corridor, unlocked a barred door, lowered a staircase, and took us into another corridor lined with doors on either side. "Third door on the right," said the inspector. "Here it is." He silently opened a panel in the door to look inside. "He's asleep," he said. "Take a look. You can see him clearly." We both peered through the bars. He was lying on his back, breathing slowly and heavily. He was a middle-sized man. He was wearing a tattered coat, just as he had when he lay down. As the inspector had said, he was incredibly dirty, but the dirt couldn't mask the ghastly ugliness of his face. A scar ran from below his eye down to his chin, twisting his upper lip and revealing 2 or 3 of his front teeth. His bright red hair fell over his forehead and eyes. "Not a pretty sight, is he?" said the inspector. "He certainly needs a bath," said Holmes. "That's why I brought the necessary tools." When he pulled a large bath sponge out of his suitcase, I nearly swallowed my tongue in astonishment. "Ha! Ha! You're quite the prankster," said the inspector. "Now, if you would kindly unlock that door quietly, we can make him presentable." "Why not?" said the inspector. "He certainly doesn't leave a good impression of Bow Street cells, does he?" He inserted the key into the lock and opened the door, and we slipped silently into the cell. The sleeping man turned slightly and continued his deep sleep. Holmes wet the sponge in the bucket and then firmly rubbed it on the prisoner's face. "Allow me to introduce you," he shouted, "to Mr. Neville St. Clair of Kent." I had never seen anything like it. The man's face peeled off like bark from a tree under the sponge. The brown colour vanished. That horrible scar and twisted lip were gone too. Finally, when the red hair was lifted, a pale-faced, dark-haired, sorrowful-looking man emerged. He rubbed his eyes and looked around in sleepy confusion. Realizing what had happened, he let out a scream, threw himself onto the bed, and buried his face in the pillow. "My God!" cried the inspector. "It's the missing man. I recognize him from the photograph." The prisoner, with the demeanour of a man resigned to his fate, turned and said, "So be it. What am I accused of?" "Murdering Mr. Neville St. Clair." "Oh no, they can't accuse you of that unless it was suicide," said the inspector with a smile. "In my 27 years of service, I have never seen anything like this. If I am indeed Mr. Neville St. Clair, it's clear that no crime has been committed, and I am being unlawfully detained," he said. "Not a crime, but a grave mistake," said Holmes. "You should have trusted your wife." "It's not about my wife. It's about my children," the man groaned. "God help me, I didn't want them to be ashamed of their father. God, what a disgrace. What am I going to do now?" Sherlock Holmes sat down beside him and put a hand on his shoulder. "If you choose to resolve this through legal channels," he said, "everyone will hear about it. However, if you can convince the police authorities that there is no case against you, it needn't go on record. Inspector Bradstreet here will take note of what you tell us and communicate it to the relevant authorities. This way, the matter won't go to court." "God bless you!" cried the man excitedly. "I'd rather go to prison, even be executed, than have my children learn my secret. You are the first to hear my story. My father was the headmaster of a school in Chesterfield, and I received a good education there. In my youth, I travelled extensively, performed on stage, and eventually worked as a reporter for an evening newspaper in London. One day, my editor asked me to write a series on begging in the city, and I eagerly accepted. That was the start of my adventures. To gather material for my articles, I had to disguise myself as a beggar. From my acting days, I knew all the tricks of makeup, and at that time, I was the best. I painted my face and created a realistic scar, using a flesh-coloured band to make my upper lip curl. Then, with a red wig and appropriate attire, I completed the look and began ostensibly selling matches, but actually begging in one of the city's business districts. After 7 hours there, I returned home and counted the money, astonished to find I had made 26 shillings and 4 pence. Without giving it much thought, I continued writing my articles. But one day, when a friend for whom I had signed a note failed to pay, I found myself with a debt of £25. As I wondered how to get the money, an idea came to me. I asked my creditors for a 2-week grace period, got permission from my editor, and spent the time disguised as a beggar in the city. In 10 days, I had collected the money and paid off my debt. The thought of being able to make in a day what would take a week of hard work was irresistible. In the long battle between my pride and the money won, and I gave up reporting for begging. Only one man knew my secret. The owner of the apartment on Swandam Lane, where I would change into my beggar's disguise each morning and revert to my gentlemanly self each evening. I paid this lascar well, so I was confident he wouldn't reveal my secret. After a while, I realised that I was collecting substantial amounts of money. I don't think every beggar on the streets of London makes £700 a year, which is even less than my average annual income. But my skills in makeup and acting eventually made me a well-known character in the city. Hundreds of pennies rained into my hat each day, and I considered it a bad day if I made less than £2. I was growing richer and more ambitious with each passing day. Eventually, I bought a house outside the city and got married. No one had the slightest suspicion about my real occupation. My dear wife only knew that I had a job in the city. She had no idea what it was. Last Monday, after finishing my shift, I was changing my clothes in the room above the opium den when I looked out the window and, to my horror and astonishment, saw my wife standing in the street looking up at me. In my shock, I let out a cry and tried to cover my face. I quickly went to my confidant, Lascar, and told him to keep anyone from coming upstairs. I could hear my wife's voice below, but I knew they wouldn't let her come up. I swiftly took off my clothes, put on my beggar outfit, did my makeup, and donned my wig. Not even my wife could recognize me in that disguise. But then I realized they might search the place and the clothes would give me away. As I opened the window, the cut on my hand, which I'd made at home that morning, started to bleed again. I grabbed my coat, filled its pockets with coins, and threw it out of the window. I was about to throw the rest of my clothes when I heard the police on the stairs and stopped. A few minutes later, I was arrested, not as Neville St. Clair, but as his murderer. I don't know if there's anything else I need to explain. I refused to wash myself as I didn't want to be recognized for as long as possible. Knowing that my wife would be worried, I gave my ring to Lascar when the police weren't looking and quickly told him what to do. "That note only reached your wife yesterday," said Holmes. "Good God, what a dreadful week she must have had," the man exclaimed. "The police were keeping a constant watch on Lascar," said Inspector Bradstreet, "so it would have been difficult for him to send the letter unnoticed. He probably gave it to one of his sailor customers, who then forgot to send it." "That must be it," Holmes said, nodding. "I have no doubt about it. Have you never been in trouble with the police for begging?" "Many times. But what's the price of a few fines?" "This must end here," said Bradstreet. "If the police are going to cover this up, the Hugh Boone matter must be closed. I swear with all my heart that it will be as you say. In that case, there's no point in pursuing the matter further. But keep in mind that if you are caught again, everything will come out. And Mr. Holmes, we are grateful to you for clarifying this matter. I'd like to know how you managed to do it." "I arrived at this conclusion," my friend began, "by sitting on 5 pillows and smoking pipe after pipe. Watson, I think we can still have breakfast on Baker Street if we hurry."